Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 616th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Stay tuned for the most amazing deal on bulk seeds and seed-saving education you have ever seen. A few years ago, our team created an event called the Great American Seed Up, where we pack hundreds of people into a room over a few days to scoop amazing open pollinated and heirloom seeds for their gardens and collections. We came up with the scoop your own model because the majority of the cost of seeds is actually in the packaging and distribution. So by eliminating these costs, people can buy seeds at bulk pricing. Well, as you can imagine, packing hundreds of people into a room is not feasible these days, so we had to get creative. We came up with the Seed Up in a Box. And what's amazing about it is that now you can get these bulk seeds wherever you are in the world. We've chosen seeds that are popular, non-GMO, open-pollinated, and easy to grow. They're bundled 10 jumbo packs per variety, so you can share them with your community, family, church, or school. Your job is to split them into individual packages. Our job is to make them as inexpensive as possible, and right now, they're averaging about 60 cents per individual jumbo portion. With all the uncertainty in the world, a lot of people are thinking about how we can make our future more food secure. Seed Up in a Box is a great way to do this because each bundle has enough seeds and education so that you may never have to purchase seeds again. This is an amazing deal, and I am so excited for the opportunity to take the Great American Seed Up all around the world via our Seed Up in a Box. Learn more about Seed Up in a Box and get your own bundle by going to greatamericanseedup.org. That's greatamericanseedup.org. Today on our podcast, we have someone who brings new life to gardens. We're talking with Tara Nolan about revamping raised bed designs. Tara is a co-founder of the award-winning gardening website, Savvy Gardener. As a freelance writer and editor, her work has appeared in the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, CBC Life and Garden Making, among others. Tara's latest book, Gardening Your Front Yard, Projects and Ideas for Big and Small Spaces, was published in March of 2020. Her first book, the best-selling Raised Bed Revolution, Build It, Fill It, Plant It, Garden Anywhere, came out in 2016. Welcome to the show today, Tara. Are you ready to rock?
I am ready.
Awesome. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Absolutely. Well, I kind of started on the journalism side of things, but as I was able to sort of marry my passion for gardening with that, that's sort of where I've been focused the last several years now. And certainly writing the books opened me up to also giving talks about gardening. So that's been, really fun and fulfilling, being able to teach people about gardening and, some of the techniques and projects and ideas that I've had. And I've volunteered at my local botanical garden. I've lived in my current house about 10 years. So when I moved here, I tried to, get involved a little bit with the community as well. And there's just such a wonderful community of gardeners where I live. So yeah, that's sort of what's brought me here. And of course, having Savvy Gardening and two amazing business partners on that, it always sort of inspires me and teaches me and, propels me forward.
How did because Savvy Gardenering's been around for a while. How did it come to be?
Yeah, so we I had already knew Nikki Jabbour. She lives on the East Coast. I'm in Southern Ontario here in Canada. And Nikki already knew Jessica Walliser, who is in the Pittsburgh area. And we just kind of bonded at this garden writing conference and kind of really lightly talked about, it'd be really cool to work on something together. And then we went home and kind of forgot about it. But in the fall, we kind of restarted that conversation and we're like, do we have something? Do we want to do this? And we did. And we really put our work into it and started brainstorming and figuring out what Savvy Gardening would become. And then we launched the following spring. So we've kind of been full steam ahead ever since. And it's really wonderful being able to work on it with other people because, I'm a freelancer and I work at home. So having business partners that we can regularly chat with and bounce ideas and everything on Zoom and Skype, we have regular calls. That's really a great way to work, I think. So Yeah.
Wow, how
That,
cool is that? And you said it opened the following spring. What spring was that?
that was I believe it was 2015.
Wow. So you've been
Yes,
doing this a while.
we have.
And it's a pretty active website. You guys looks like you do a lot of work there.
It is. It's very robust as far as the content goes, and we get a lot of page views. We have a readership from around the world, which is really cool, and active on social media. So yeah, we have a lot of fun with it, and I think the benefit is that there are the three of us, so we're all able to tackle different areas as well, and really focus on the different aspects of the website and running it.
And you're not just talking about edibles then either, because I'm looking at your latest posts, how to care for hostas in pots.
Yes. So we all have we all grow vegetables and we all grow food and have raised beds, but we all kind of have our niches as well. And so I really love the ornamental side of things too. So I love talking about, putting all your ornamental pots together, but maybe sneaking some food in too. I've got a huge perennial garden out front and I'm always trying to expand my garden. So, it's really nice that we all come at it from different areas. So I think that's what kind of makes the site really successful as well, because we all, are really interested in different areas.
And so gardening's your hobby, but your profession is writing.
Yes, exactly. And it was really kind of fortuitous to be able to bring those two things together. Once I kind of honed in on that, idea that I really wanted to focus writing on what I was passionate about, that was a really good step forward for me.
So let's think back in your life, because you sound on the younger side. And how
I think I sound younger than I am.
Oh, okay, good. Well, typically younger people don't get into gardening. How'd that happen?
Well,
let me jump in here. If I apologize to anybody out there that's listening that's younger and you're in gardening, that there's no offense meant. I just generally the people that I talk to are older like me that are into gardening. So
and you're absolutely right. I think with a lot of that, it's been wonderful to see, especially throughout the past year or so, all the younger people really getting into gardening. For me, I think I've always had this sort of affinity for it. I remember sort of one of my earliest memories. I kind of sort of helped my mom in the garden. I wasn't really, I think I liked, deadheading the petunias and things like that. I wasn't super hands in the dirt. But when I was in university, I remember being home one Easter weekend one year because I had exams and I wasn't able to go home for the long weekends. And I remember at one point just needing a break and going out back. And of course, I was in a student house. The gardens hadn't really been cared for in a really long time. And I just went out and started pulling stuff out, and I uncovered these little tiny daffodils just trying to make their way through all the debris that was there because the garden had been unloved for so long. And so that's sort of my earliest memory of just really wanting to get out there and garden. And then once even renting some of my first homes, I always had a few pots or a little patch of the back garden when I was in rentals. And then when I got my first home, I inherited this beautiful perennial garden and had been so well cared for by the previous owner. Really interesting plants, sculpted kind of in this wavy pattern all around the whole backyard. And so I had this really great framework to build on. And then I just kind of went from there. And that's where I think everything was really jump started, I would say.
So it was magically just kind of there as a flavor in your life all along.
Mm-hmm. I would say so. And just this sort of need to be outside and to do something, be industrious in the garden and turn it into something.
Yeah. Wow. And so you recently wrote a book and it came out during COVID, interestingly enough. Tell me.
It sure did.
Yeah. Tell me and that was a perfect time for it. Because one of the things that I noticed about our business is that it exploded last year.
Absolutely. I mean, savvy gardening exploded traffic-wise as well. And then the book came out kind of the week everything got shut down here.
Right.
So, a lot of my talks were canceled, but it was great because I was still able to, get a bit of press. Things were recorded online or written about online or for newspapers and magazines. So, I still benefited from the book coming out and it being, publicized. So that was really lovely. And this year, kind of, there was a few articles too, which was nice that I kind of continued that momentum that had been kind of started, but a bit stalled because of the pandemic. So this past spring, I've been doing a lot of promoting the book as well. So
tell us about the book.
It's been great. Well, I kind of set out to sort of just provide ideas and inspiration to reimagine that front yard and sort of shift that traditional focus of just a pristine, perfect lawn and maybe a small foundation planting, and think about the possibilities of what you could transform it into. So, it doesn't mean necessarily getting rid of all of your grass, but maybe expanding your gardens, maybe having a seating area so you can enjoy the front yard garden. And certainly, when you're able, like depending on where you live, to have that social area that you could, sit in the garden and enjoy. Consider maybe growing food in your front yard. Consider, whether you want to maybe have a cutting garden or a meadow or a rain garden, and work, with the environment a little bit of the conditions of your property. So it's just really a big idea book of, trying to inspire people to kind of branch out and sort of rethink that traditional front yard framework.
Nice. Well, and here at the Urban Farm, most of my groceries grow in the front yard.
That's awesome. I love it.
So I've been playing in my front yard for a long time. That way people walking by can see it, and it makes for a bigger neighborhood impact, I think.
I think so too. And I think it inspires other people as well. My neighbor actually, who, I didn't really expect that she would ever do this, but her husband's built her sort of this big raised bed structure. They've enclosed it with some fencing to keep the squirrels and the deer out, right in their front yard. And I'm just so impressed. And it looks really good. I mean, it's a really cool structure that they've put together. So I've been seeing more and more of that over the last few years. And so, that was really, part of that, sort of energy, of thinking outside the box was poured into the book.
So you're writing this book, and I'm sure you did research.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. And, it's interesting just talking to different garden designers, because that sort of leads you down, to other people. So I did have this sort of wide net cast throughout North America, I would say. And even actually, I spoke to a couple of people in England, because I had the good fortune of going to the Chelsea Flower Show a few years ago.
Oh,
and so
wow.
that really inspired me as well, because they had this one whole installation was about greening Grey Britain, it was called. And so the idea was to kind of unpave paradise and try to put gardens in places that they weren't traditionally. And so that really inspired me with a couple of projects for the book as well. And I got permission to use a couple of them and to chat. And I chatted with these garden designers. So that was just really cool opportunity. And even just all the garden designers that I was able to touch base with around North America, people that I had maybe met on a trip or I had met through social media even, and I've never even met in person. I think, there's just such a wonderful community of gardening and sharing. It was really fun and a lot of work to put together and kind of condense it and bring it all together. So
nice. And in that research, was there a magical moment that you discovered that was like, wow, this is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing?
There was a few things. One of the things that I think kind of dawned on me at one point was that I had this thread of environmentalism, kind of running through the book a little bit. I kind of realized that every chapter kind of tied into having this mindfulness for the environment, whether it was planting eco-friendly grasses, whether it was growing your own food, or trying to figure out how to divert and filter rainwater so that it doesn't end up in your basement or in the sewer system or in your lakes and streams. So, kind of every step I took when I was coming together, that was sort of eye-opening in a way, because I was kind of tackling each chapter separately, but then I realized that there was this thread that sort of tied it all together in a really nice way. And then I managed to, kind of work that in as well once it kind of dawned on me that, everything kind of connected, even though they were different projects or different sort of angles, they all sort of tied into this eco-friendly mindset.
Nice. And tell us about your favorite raised bed projects.
There's a few. One of them is, I call it sort of an A-frame or vertical raised bed that we built for my first book. And I think it's a good one because it's sort of challenging that idea that you need to have a piece of property or land to grow food on. It's a vertical raised bed. And so Each shelf or sort of little pocket of it, it's built out of wood. They're not super deep, so you can't really grow a big tomato in there, but you can grow lots of greens, you can grow herbs, you can grow edible flowers. So that's one of my favorite projects, and it's actually we photographed it at my sister's down the street. So she had it for a couple of years, and then she let me bring it up the street because she lives just a few doors down, and now it's in my driveway, and it's a really good place to grow all of my greens and some of my herbs as well.
Nice. That's one of the things that I like to get set up is a year-round greens growing something so that we can have a salad at any time. It sounds like that's what this is.
Exactly. And even, once it does freeze over, once the really heavy, frost and snow comes at the end of the season. But I was picking, I think it was Christmas Day, actually. I was snipping little bits of parsley that were still growing in one of the little trays. So, that was kind of exciting to be able to pick something in the winter. I do have some, one raised bed where I cover things, and I'm able to kind of harvest a little bit throughout the season, like things like kale and hardy greens. But just to have it growing in plain sight on the driveway and being able to go out there. I think we got a huge snowstorm that evening, so I was just in time, but that was really gratifying.
Nice. And so for somebody that doesn't want to turn their whole lawn into a vegetable garden, what do you recommend?
So I think, it's possible to sneak veggies in. So there's a couple of different things I mentioned in the book. One of them is I have a friend who's a carpenter, and he built this really cool live edge raised bed. And it's pretty small. So it just fits, usually a couple of maybe a pepper, a tomato, and then I'll put a basil in between. And so, I just have it set in my established perennial garden in my front yard beside a rose of Sharon and among, some of the native perennials that I have. And, it looks really nice. It's decorative. You can't even actually see it from the street unless you look hard enough. And so, if people are a little reticent to put something in their front yard, you could kind of put something into your established perennial garden. Another is just simply planting among your perennials. So for one of the photographs we took, I went to my mom's front yard garden and I put a tomato in with a really pretty obelisk over top. And she liked that so much, and being able to, go out and pick some cherry tomatoes from her front yard, that, she's subsequently put it in every year since we photographed it. So, I think that kind of planted the idea in her head as well to, kind of mix in a few edibles in with the ornamentals. Another thing I do is I add, for edging plants, I have, a little rock garden sort of separation in my one front yard garden where I've planted lemon thyme. So it's my border plant, but it's also edible. And another one that I can go out and pick even, unless it's covered in snow, but in the dead of winter. So yeah, I think just being able to kind of sneak stuff into what's already there. Also, you have the option of containers. I put a lot of herbs into my ornamental containers for the foliage. So instead of getting those, kind of filler plants that are just leaves, I try to pick, a pineapple sage, or I'll choose a curly parsley or creeping rosemary to drape over the sides. So I try to kind of sneak things in that way.
Wow, you've gotten really creative.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I always need space for plants too. So I think some of it's out of necessity sometimes, because I always end up with way more plants than I have space for.
Right.
But it's certainly, it's kind of fun to then figure out, okay, where is this going to go?
Yeah. My partner Heidi has always grown flowers on the front porch in pots. And this past season with COVID, we planted them full of groceries instead.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think that's such a wonderful use of the space, right?
Right. So can we talk about your first book?
Absolutely.
Raised Bed Revolution. I love the title and the subtitle. Build it, fill it, plant it, garden anywhere. So tell me about the book, and why do we do raised beds?
So when I first moved to this current home that I'm in, I had that sort of typical veggie garden off to the side of the yard. It was a bit lumpy and misshapen. And so I thought, well, for me, I just wanted to pretty up the area. So really it was an aesthetic decision when I first started out. And then once the book opportunity came along and I started researching about the benefits of raised beds, that sort of opened me up to a whole bunch of other, benefits that come from growing in raised bed gardens, especially living in a more northern climate where, our seasons are a little bit shorter. So I started kind of thinking of different ideas for raised beds, because it doesn't have to be that typical, 3 or 4 feet wide by, 6 to 8 feet long bed. You can have, the smaller raised beds. You can have a vertical garden, like I mentioned. You could have sort of a rolling raised bed on wheels if you can just fit it in your driveway. So there's just lots of possibilities that were really fun to explore, and which I have a chapter on growing food in the new book as well. So it's just that kind of an expansion of that idea of growing food absolutely anywhere, provided you have that sunny space and those hours of sunlight that you need to grow, all the heat levers like tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers.
Right. Have you ever played with any of the, so there's tower gardens, which are a hydroponic thing, and then there's garden towers, which are dirt-based. Have you ever played with any of those?
I haven't, to be honest, but it's certainly something that I've looked into a little bit. I feel like every year I kind of add a couple more things to my collection. So that's probably something that's in my future for sure.
Yeah, you and me too. I love playing and experimenting with new things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
So as gardeners, I think we always have little things that kind of go awry, whether it's a pest issue or, maybe putting something in the wrong space. So when, I'm trying to think, I think one of the main ones for me was that for my first book, I had a 4x8 raised bed, and I chose a sunny area that hadn't been filled yet. And then I realized, so I live under what's called the Niagara Escarpment. So just a couple houses up from me is this sort of mountain or wall of rock and trees. So everything kind of runs down through my property to the next neighbor, to the next neighbor, to the next neighbor. And so I put my raised bed in an area that gets a little bit of water from the neighbor's property, and my raised bed does not dry out as quickly. And so that for me was a real learning experience to really figure out what the conditions are of your placement before putting in a raised bed. So I did know that it was like the grass got a little spongy after a huge rainstorm in that area in particular, but I wasn't really thinking when I decided to put the raised bed there. So what I probably should have done was put in a bunch of gravel just to kind of let the water filter a little bit better. It's also the raised bed where I demonstrated putting landscape fabric in the bottom. So again, even though it's permeable, the raised bed just drains so much more slowly. So what I do want, and I keep saying this every year, but I end up planting something and then I'm not able to move it, but I would like to move that raised bed just over a little bit more towards the front of the side yard. Right now it's towards the back, and maybe turn that area into a rain garden where the plants can help filter the rain and I don't have to worry about it after a big heavy rainstorm. So that I would say that's one of my mishaps.
Well, and that's how we learn. So what do you consider your biggest success?
And is this in the garden, or would you say this is in general?
I'm going to let you decide that.
I would say that for me, having the opportunity to write Raised Bed Revolution was something that I'm just immensely proud of and grateful for the opportunity. And it's really, allowed me to educate a lot of people about the benefits of growing in raised beds, how, it's something that anyone can do, provided they have the right growing conditions. And even, if you don't have the woodworking skills or the handyman, side of you, there's kits, there's lots of other options. I have a whole section, not handy, no problem. So I think that for me, that's just a real shining moment, I would say, in my career. And it ties into my gardening as well.
Yeah. And so you'd never written a book before at that point?
I hadn't, no.
How did it come about that you got that book moving? How did you get a publisher? How did that all magically happen?
Well, I have to say it did magically happen. It was just a very wonderful opportunity that came my way, actually through one of my business partners who recommended me for the project to my publisher. So, and then, we kind of went through this whole sort of vetting process where I had actually worked years ago as a magazine editor at both a woodworking magazine and for the website for Canadian Gardening magazine. So I think those two bits of my background, and also being an avid gardener and the rest of my writing background, really kind of came together to show them that I was the right person to write this book.
So you had metaphorically been planting seeds all along the way, and then that showed up.
I guess so. Inadvertently, yes. I mean, I think, the hard work that I put in over, so many years, and just the relationships that I've made with, different people in the industry definitely kind of led me towards that, which, I'm so grateful for.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I giggle as I've read the title and subtitle a couple of times. I giggle. I love it. Thank you.
Thanks.
What drives you?
I would say, so there was a point in my career where I really kind of made that decision that I wanted to focus on writing about my passions. One of those, probably the main one, is gardening. The other is actually mountain biking, which is completely unrelated.
Nice.
But I do have the good fortune of writing about that as well, and interviewing athletes and writing about different destinations to mountain bike and that sort of thing, but also gardening. And so, being able to just really focus my thoughts on what I wanted to write about when it came to the pitching process, because as a freelance writer, you're always sort of in pitch and idea mode. So, really kind of narrowing in on what I wanted to write about, I think was a big gift to myself and to my career, because it really allowed me to kind of, focus and expand everything into the education part of my job that I do, and answering questions and writing articles. And, that's been really gratifying.
Nice. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
If you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
So this is really hard because I have so many reference books that I go to, and also my two business partners, Nikki Jabbour and Jessica Walliser. I mean, they've both written fabulous books, including two that came out, just a few months ago that I'm actively using. But I would say the one, it was kind of a turning point for me too in my gardening mindset, I would say, is the book Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver.
Yeah.
And, it's a nonfiction book by one of my favorite fiction writers. And essentially, she kind of went off the grid for a year with her family. They tried to grow everything or source it locally. And if they couldn't, they just went without. And so that book was a real turning point for me, I would say, just in my own gardening. It really made me want to grow more food. It made me want to preserve more of my food over the winter to enjoy. That was, both my husband and I read it and really enjoyed it back when it came out. And, that was sort of a favorite that's remained in my collection, I would say.
Nice. And it sounded like you maybe had a second one hanging out there that you wanted to talk about.
Oh, well, I mean, so there's another one that kind of follows me around, and it's this cute little tiny book, and it's called The Pruning Answer Book. And I actually I don't know the author's name of it, but I can provide that to you to share. But that's something that I'm always consulting, because I live on a ravine and I also have a lot of trees and shrubs. So I'm always trying to figure out what to prune when.
And what's the name of that book?
It's The Pruning Answer Book.
The Pruning Answer Book. Wow, that sounds like something I want to catch up with. And that's the reason I asked this question, is so that I get new stuff to read all the time.
Yeah, it's great to get recommendations from other gardeners,
right?
Because I have a huge bookshelf. I probably should be bringing more in, but yeah, I'm always keen to hear what other people are reading as well. And I think even with COVID, actually, a lot of people have been really getting into gardening in my Instagram feed. So I'm always finding these new writers, but just from different angles, even just from an environmental perspective. So I've really been sort of expanding my collection and my reading that way too. So it's been wonderful.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
So I would say, and it's something that I mentioned in my new book, is that if you're looking to tackle a huge project, and you rather than just ripping out your whole front lawn without a plan, it's a good idea to have a plan in mind. It's also a good idea to start small. So even if you do have a drawing of what you imagine your eventual dream garden to be, don't think you have to tackle it all in one season. Start small. Start maybe, expanding an existing garden in your front yard, for example, instead of just ripping out all the rest of the grass and starting. Because if you don't have anything to go in there right away, you're going to be dealing with a ton of weeds and heartache and work, So it's a good idea to start small, just from a logistics perspective, but also just, to kind of ease you into it and not think you have to sort of bite off this massive project all at once. It's okay to, work on a little bit of it this season. And then if you have time, great, tackle the next bit, or wait till the following year to do it.
Amen to that.
Don't pressure yourself. That's sort of the biggest piece of advice is just, kind of take it as on your own timeline.
Right. Don't take on too much.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it has been an absolute delight chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Same. Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a great conversation.
Oh, yes, it has. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, you can find my articles and all the gardening articles from my partners, Nikki and Jessica, at savvygardening.com. We're also across, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter as Savvy Gardening. Myself, I'm on Instagram at Tara_E, where I share all of my gardening adventures. And then I also have a Raised Bed Revolution Facebook page where I share content and ideas or, some of the articles that I've written myself.
Excellent. And where can we find your books?
My books are available, wherever books are sold. Small bookstores, they're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Here in Canada, they're at Indigo, which is another big bookseller. And they should be, at different booksellers around the world as well.
Excellent. And you can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Tara.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.